Okay, we're going to be starting on page 100 today. We're jumping back because we skipped something, and then we're going to jump forward again. So we're on page 100 because page 100 is not a letter, it's actually a story. And the story is referenced in our next letter. So I wanted to first go through the story so we know what the Rebbe is referencing. Okay? Okay. So there was a great Hasidic master. Again, I'm going to just remind you, when I say a Hasidic master, I'm talking about a man who was a leader of a Hasidic movement, a sect. So the same way the Rebbe is the leader of the Chabad sect of Hasidism, there are many different sects amongst the Hasidim. And what happened was the Baal Shem Tov founded the Hasidic movement. And then after he passed away, he had many students, and different students became leaders, and they each sort of established, a following, and they developed what we would call a sect, SECT. Okay? And when I say a Hasidic master, I'm talking about a man who, generally speaking, at that time, things change over generations, but at that time, the leaders of Hasidic sects, at that time, were all students of the Baal Shem Tov. They were very, very advanced, elevated, godly people. They all had different personalities, as every human being does, and their focuses were a little varied, right? Of course, the primary focus was the same for them all, and that was fulfilling God's purpose in this world, but with very different, varying approaches. As Chabad has a very unique and distinct approach, distinct to all. In some respect, Chabad is distinct from all the other groups, which I'm not going to explain right now what that distinction is. And so, one of these great Hasidic masters was a man by the name of Reb Menachem Nachum. He was known as Reb Nachum of Chernobyl. And I know many of us are familiar now with the city of Chernobyl, unfortunately, because of the nuclear disaster that happened there. So the Saint Reb Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl, as everyone knows, was desperately poor all his days. So it's interesting that even among Hasidic masters, you had some of them who were desperately poor and some of them who were actually very wealthy. And he was desperately poor and was once a certain Chassid. Now, let me go to also the way Hasidic, we call them the Hasidic sects, have a Hasidic master, and the Hasidic master, and I'm just using the language that we use in English, they hold court, which basically means that, they have a synagogue where they are the rabbi and where they teach, and etc. Their followers come to meet them. So the tradition in the Hasidic communities is that when a Hasidic Jew comes to meet his master, his Rebbe, the Hasidic master, he gives him a note, which we call in Hebrew a pan, which is exactly what we actually do. For those of you who may have done this, when we go to the Ohel, to the Rebbe's grave, we write a letter to the Rebbe. We call that in Hebrew a pan, which pan is really two letters, Pei Nun, which stands for Pidyon Nefesh, redemption of the soul. And simply what that means is that when we meet a Rebbe, the Rebbe is a what we call a collective soul, a broader soul that has relationships with many souls in the generation and can sense souls and can actually help us in becoming more aware of our own selves. That's a lot of what goes on between a Chassid and a Rebbe. So when we meet the Rebbe, we write a pan, or what other Hasidic Jews would call a kvittel, which a kvittel just means a note in Yiddish. And along with that, we also give some money for tzedakah, for charity. So whatever amount, it doesn't have to be large or small, which we have the custom when we go to the Ohel as well, you put in at least something into the tzedakah box when you come out of the Ohel. So that's the background of what's going to be happening in this story here, as you'll begin to understand. So Once a certain chassid brought him a gift of 300 rubles in banknotes, the equivalent of 100 silver rubles. So he once had a wealthy follower who came to him and spoke to him and asked him for blessings and guidance, whatever it is, and he gave him a tremendous amount of money. I don't know, it sounds like 100 silver rubles was a lot of money. So he gave him a lot of money. The family of the tzaddik, by the way, it was different. It was not like, this wasn't the United States of America, it was Russia, right? So there wasn't an organization that's a 501c3. You're not making a check out to the organization, right? You're giving cash to the rabbi. That's what he was doing, okay? And the family of the tzaddik, the family of Rabbi Nachum of Chernobyl, and his personal assistant, he has a personal assistant we're going to call, they say him a curve here, I'm going to just say the Gabai, that's what they would typically call him, were all overjoyed when they got wind of this. However they got wind of this, because it really happens in private, but they understood that probably the attendant, the Gabai, in between appointments, walked in, and either the Rebbe told him or he saw the money sitting on the desk of the Rebbe, so he understood a lot of money coming in, and they were very, very happy. Why were they very happy? Because they were deeply in debt, they barely had money to put food on their table, and now they're going to have a few months of some breathing room. That's the reason why they were happy. Something that really, thank God, none of us can really relate to, because thank God we don't experience such poverty. At long last, they would be... Okay, so at long last, they would be able to shake off the bulky debts that they owed for bread, meat, fish, and so on. Soon after that chassid had left, the tzaddik received a few dozen visitors for private interview. More people kept on coming in, because usually it was many hours of meetings, one right after the other. And then he took a break to pray the Ma'ariv service, the evening service. He then closed himself alone in his study for a time. He finally opened the door and asked to see one more of the Hasidim with whom he had already spoken that evening. He said he wanted to see one of the Hasidim that he already had spoken to, and later resumed the series of private consultations, which continued until late into the night. And then he continued the regular appointments through the night. When the last visitor had left, the above-mentioned Gabai, who was responsible for the household expenses, whose job was to make sure the household functioned, called on the tzaddik in order to receive the money needed to settle the accounts. In fact, as soon as he had heard of the 300 rubles, he had prepared a list of all the creditors and had calculated how much he would now be able to give to each of them in part. He was already figuring out how to spend the 300 rubles to pay back at least some of the debts that they owed. Rebbe Nachum thereupon opened the drawer of his table, in which he used to keep it's called Maimud, the Maimud money that Hasidim had volunteered to give him for the support of his household. The money that was intended for distribution to charity was kept in a separate drawer in order to avert the remotest possibility of confusion between the two. So there were different types of money that were collected. There was money that people gave specifically for the rabbi's house, and there was money that people gave specifically to give to charity. And he would keep them separate, of course, so that there wouldn't be any confusion. Looking inside the drawer, the Gabai saw a few silver coins and sundry copper coins, but no sign of the bills. Suddenly the Gabai sees that there's just a few dollars in there. The hundreds of rubles are gone. He was perplexed. The tzaddik told him to take all the coins that he saw, as well as 3 gold coins that he found among them. When the Gabai counted them all, they came to the value of almost 100 banknotes. He stood still in unquestioning silence. He was not bold enough to inquire after the fate of the 300 rubles, but nor did he know what to do for the household that lay heavily on his heart. He was responsible for the household expenses. He had seen a lot of money come in, and then suddenly the money's not there. So seeing how his face had dropped, the tzaddik asked him, "Why do you look so sad? Has God, who provides bread for all creatures, not shown us, in his loving kindness, undeserved generosity? Doesn't God show us undeserved generosity in the way he makes sure we always have what we need? Look how many of our brethren from many places labored and toiled and brought us this sum. Look, our people are working very, very hard every day, and they brought us all this money. Though the Gabbai was assuredly worthy of the trust that his discreet position entailed, he could no longer restrain himself. The deaths and the privation that hung over the Rebbe's household caused him anguish, and from the pain of his heart, his words sprang forth uncontrived. But where are the 300 rubles which that chassid brought? That sum together with this could have helped us pay off some of our debts. It is true, conceded the tzaddik, that I was given the 300 rubles. My first reaction, now we're going into the inner thinking of a tzaddik. What was he thinking when he got this money? So he said, my first reaction was to wonder why I deserved such a large sum. And then I was happy that I had found favor in the eyes of the Almighty, and that he had chosen to sustain my family and myself with a generous hand and in a respectable manner. First I said, why did Hashem bless me with such abundance? And then I said, thank you to Hashem, right, for being so generous to me. But then I thought into the subject a little more deeply, and I became distressed. Lest God had given me material benefits instead of spiritual riches. Then I suddenly got concerned. Maybe God is rewarding me with material blessing instead of spiritual blessing. I would never want to trade material blessing for spiritual blessing. Now, among the Hasidim who visited me soon after that gift arrived, was one who poured out his troubles to me. For a whole year, he had not paid his tuition fees to the local malamed, that's a local teacher who teaches children, who was penniless but pious, and continued teaching his little ones in the hope that one day he would somehow pay his dues. He was the malamed, the teacher of this man's children, continued teaching even though he wasn't getting paid, hoping one day the guy would pay him. The squire of the estates, the parrots of the estate, moreover, had threatened to drive him out of his house because of his 8 months' arrears on the rental of his millstones and his inn. And to make the situation even more acute, he now had to arrange a wedding for his eldest daughter. So basically, he had a follower that came in after the wealthy one that gave him the 300 rubles and said, number one, I didn't pay my malamed, the tutor for my kids. Number two, the squire who I rent my property from is threatening to throw me out because I didn't pay him for 8 months' rent. And number three, I have a daughter to marry. How am I supposed to survive all of this? And this, by the way, was the classic life of Jews in Europe, in those days. This is about 250 years ago, the late 1700s or early 1800s. So then I thought that perhaps the Almighty had given me the special privilege of being the agent for the disbursement of charity in a way that would earn me such great mitzvahs. The support of his children in their Torah study, the saving of a family from homelessness, and dowering a poor bride. All of them 3 major mitzvahs. And I asked him how much he needed. And the amount was exactly right. What did the man say? He needed 300 rubles. So as I saw that God gave me the 300 rubles to help this guy, not for me to use. But then, once I had decided to present him with the entire 300 rubles, another thought came to my mind. Was it right to give it all to one man? Look, there are many people who are coming to me with financial problems. Why should I give all of the money to one man? Maybe I should help multiple people, break it down. Like, how do you know what to do? An amount such as this could bring relief to at least 6 families. I was vexed. Both views seemed to be just and equitable, and I could not decide between them. And that was when I closed myself in my room so that I could weigh both arguments. That's the reason why he took some time for himself. After consideration, I realized that these 2 views came from those 2 diverse judges that every one of us has living within us, the good inclination and the evil inclination. And that the view which proposed dividing up the amount for several families did not come from the good inclination. He said, I came to realize that I should give all 300 to this one man, and that was my good inclination's voice, and it was my evil inclination that was telling me, no, give it out to multiple people. How did I know? Because if this, and this is the big lesson, if this had been the view of the good inclination, then as soon as the money reached me, he should have expressed his opinion as follows. Nachum, here you've been given 300 rubles. Take it and divide it up into 6 parts. Give away 5 for the needy and keep 1 for yourself. But the good inclination didn't say anything. Only after the Almighty had made it my privilege to heed the good inclination and decide to do what was right, only then did that other smart little guy, that's a euphemism for the evil inclination, come along and speak to me craftily. I therefore took the advice of the good inclination and I called in that chassid and gave him the 300 rubles. He was basically saying, and this is going to be the big lesson the Rebbe is going to refer to in a letter, that he knew it was the evil inclination that said split it up into 6 people, because the evil inclination had no comment until he was willing to do something very good. And then suddenly the inclination comes to stop him from doing this really good thing. See, until he decided to give the 300 rubles to this one individual, the evil inclination didn't say a word about the 300 rubles. The moment he decided to do something good, the evil inclination comes and says, well, maybe you should do it differently. And that second thought, which is attacking a good thought, is a sign that it is not a healthy thought. It's not coming from a good place. This is a very powerful lesson that we learn from Reb Nachum of Chernobyl. So now with this, we're going to jump down to page 110. Just a moment. We're going to jump down to page 112, letter 39. Yes, what's the question?
They could have been in very similar situation to the person that he gave the money to. And as a leader of a community, doesn't he have to show leadership in terms of paying your debts? So how did he know that the debt holders were not in as dire a situation as this man?
Yeah. That's a very good question. Good question. So we say, I'm going to say this. First, I'm going to say this. There's a saying in Yiddish, which means on a story we don't ask questions. Let me explain what that means. It doesn't mean we don't ask questions. It means when we hear a story, we don't know all of the information, right? So we can ask a million questions, we just don't know. Right? However, we're going to assume, being that it was Reb Nachum of Chernobyl, so I'm going to make a few assumptions here. I'm going to assume that he knew that none of them were in this dire situation. Most likely, if they were, they'd be standing online, coming and telling him and speaking to him, or telling him directly that. Right? I'm assuming that they gave him money on loan, so it wasn't as if he owed them money, and they were. I'm assuming the arrangement was that they gave it to him on credit, and that they were happy to do so because of who he was. And now his determination needs to be, how quickly should I pay them back so I can feel safe? Which is not the way he thought, by the way, I can tell you that, right? Or, what is my responsibility? First and foremost, why is God giving me this money? What's my responsibility with his money? And as a leader, I have responsibility to people. And when is that obligation due?
Well, we don't know any of that.
So we're assuming, so that's what I'm saying. So it would be very safe to assume that they weren't due. That's what I'm saying. I mean, and that's why I say if a fragment can kash is only because we don't know. So, but we're going to trust if it was Reb Nachum of Chernobyl. And by the way, I wouldn't say this about, I want to be clear about something. I wouldn't say this about any rabbi, right? But we're talking about a great Hasidic master. So he's a person who I have absolute trust in, right? I know all the stories and the this and that, whatever it is. I'm not saying that rabbis get blank passes, but I am saying that when a person is someone who has gained the respect of thousands and thousands of Jews because of the integrity that they've demonstrated, both on all levels of life. So we're just going to assume, and of course we don't know, so we don't have any other choice either, that those were not issues. Right? So now he's just trying to find out for himself what is the proper thing to do. And I think the most important thing here is this: being that we don't know the details of this story and of most stories, the point is only to just take out the main point that this story teaches, as the Rebbe is going to emphasize in the letter, and that is that the evil inclination generally shows up after you decide to do something good and questions it. That is generally the approach of the evil inclination. So when you have a good thought to do something good, and then you have a second thought, that second thought is very, very questionable. Because it's most likely, there's a very high chance that a second thought came up because of its concern that you may do something very good, which was your first thought. And so that is actually a way of guiding ourselves in decision making, believe it or not. Okay, that's the point. That's the point. Okay, so let's go now to. I'll make one more comment, Roseanne. I understand what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you at all. It's just a matter of what the circumstances were. I have a very big problem when, in fact, when we'll say, I know this in the world of nonprofits. This is I think less common than it used to be, but it used to be very common, especially in schools, where schools did not have money to pay their teachers, and therefore teachers would go, like sort of like it was insinuated, as mentioned in this story, but where teachers would go for months, a few months without pay, although they all had families and had to feed them, etc. And and they were the money was going to running the school as opposed to paying the teachers. And these things are very questionable and could be very problematic. And, I agree with you in point. I'm just trusting that in this case, that wasn't there was no issue with the people he owed the money to.
No, I understand what you're saying. I just raise it because if this is supposed to teach a lesson in morality, whatever, there just seems to be something in there that's off kilter for me.
Unless the facts are differently than we think. Not than we think. They're different. So let's set up the parameters of the story in a way where it's not off kilter, which we can easily do. And I would suggest that because of my trust in the individual that the story's about. That's why I would do that without hesitation. I wouldn't do that generally. Human beings are very fallible, but there are distinct individuals who have proven themselves to be extraordinary. Okay. Let's go to letter 39, recognizing the tricks of the evil inclination. So you see already the association between this letter and the story. This is written in 1954. Greetings and blessings in response to your letter in which you describe the difficulties you are encountering in the yeshiva of Tomchei Temimim. We didn't do this last week, right? I thought we may have started it. I forgot. One second. Maybe it's the next. Yeah. Okay, let's go through it. So this is Tomchei Temimim means that he is. I think we may have started the letter, but unless the previous letter. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. We had a similar letter. Anyway, Tomchei Temimim is the name of Chabad, of the classic name for the Chabad yeshiva. So here's a guy who comes into Tomchei Temimim, into Chabad school yeshiva, and he was struggling. And I'm assuming he was probably either in high school, but most likely even post high school in rabbinical college, or more accurately put, the unfamiliarity you are experiencing with the schedule and the new studies. All right, didn't I tell you last week my son's study schedule in high school? Yeah. So that was an introduction. I gave you an introduction to this letter. So I believe he was coming from a different school, a different yeshiva that was not Chabad. Now he's coming into Chabad, and the culture and maybe the study schedule was unfamiliar with him, and he was having trouble with it. Surely you are familiar with the teaching of our sages in Tractate Sukkah, which states that the evil inclination of every person constantly wages war with him, to the point that the Torah itself testifies that were it not for God's help, one would not be able to overcome it. So this is a very fascinating thing. The Talmud says, which by the way, the Alter Rebbe and Tanya, and we're going to be learning it in the next few weeks in the daily study of Tanya, discusses how the evil inclination is incessant, is relentless. It never stops in challenging a person. And that's why we always have to stay on our feet and be, about doing the right thing. not only that, he's so incessant that the only way we have an upper hand, potentially, if we choose to, right? We have an upper hand to override the evil inclination, that we are more powerful than the evil inclination, is because God stands by our side to support us when we make an effort to go in the right direction. That's the first thing the Rebbe tells him. From this, it is clear that if his inclination sees that a young man who desires to be God-fearing and wants to learn has found a path that allows him to advance both in fear of heaven and in Torah study, that when the evil inclination sees that there's a young man who took a step to be even more God-fearing and take a greater step in his study of Torah, what's he going to do? The evil inclination. It will immediately seek additional tactics to interfere in any way possible to hinder his new path. The Rebbe is saying something very powerful here. The Rebbe is saying, which is really just he's teaching what the Talmud is saying. The moment the evil inclination sees us doing something good, it will begin opposing immediately. That's the reason why, by the way, some people say, when they have opposition or something is difficult, well, maybe this is a sign I shouldn't be doing this. Well, actually, maybe it's a sign that you should be doing it. You understand? Maybe it's a sign you should be doing it. That's why you have opposition. The evil, I always repeat a story that I heard a Chabad rabbi share once where he made this effort. I'm quite confident I shared this with our class here. That he was, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was building a mikveh. It was in South America. He was trying to undertake something. He was having tremendous difficulties. And the rabbi kept on encouraging him to continue. And then finally, he was making progress, and all of a sudden, like sort of last minute type of thing, I think it was a government thing or something like that, stopped the construction or whatever it may be. And he was like, this is it. I had enough. He's throwing his hat in. And the Rebbe's response to him was, right when you're finally about to achieve your goal, the evil inclination sees what you're about to achieve, which is such an enormous thing. A mikveh is such a powerful force of godliness, of spirituality, that he throws in a last-ditch effort to stop you, and you're going to give in to him now? That was the Rebbe's message to him, and that's really the point here. So again, this is where shaping tremendous perspective. Yeah, sure.
Scenario that I want to think about, but often I might second guess myself. I'll have a reaction, I'll make a decision, and I am working on second guessing myself so much and kind of just going with my gut. I think that's the right thing to do, but it happens. Is there any correlation between this feeling of second guessing ourselves, like did I make the right decision? Who else is impacted by this? Am I doing the right thing? Or does that creep into maybe a evil inclination?
That's a great question. I am a big second guesser, by the way. I believe in second guessing, meaning I believe in really assessing things fully. I don't know if that's the same thing as second guessing, sort of, but it's assessing things fully maybe is different than second guessing, but trying to be honest. But I would say this. I would say that the best way to be able to determine in any situation whether our second guessing is the evil inclination or not, because there is a very good chance it is, although it's not definite, right? It's not definite. And the reason why I'm saying it's not definite is because we're not such divinely aligned people. Now, even though when we have a knee-jerk reaction to do something good, that usually is our good inclination that was able to have his voice heard before opposition came up. That's which is the point here. But regardless, sometimes we have selfish ideas as well. And that's the reason why I would say that an outside voice is very important. And an outside voice basically is a voice that is objective. A voice that is objective is someone that doesn't have any ties to the decisions that we're making, and therefore they have no agenda. And that can either be a good friend, and I say a good friend because it means a friend who my relationship is so close with them that they can say anything to me and I will hear it, and they feel safe to say it. So they don't have to toe the line. Or a mentor, which means someone who's not my friend necessarily, like as in buddy friend, like equals, but someone who I look up to and who I consult with from time to time, who knows me in a general sense, so they know when I bring an issue, they know the general dynamics involved, and they can tell me their objective view of it. So if you're ever in that quandary, or I had second guessed, and maybe it's not the right thing to do, but you're not sure if it's evil inclination, I would say to get advice from someone outside. And I do think also that with time, as we do that, we develop more inner clarity. Yeah.
Sometimes the initial reaction is thinking about, well, what's everybody else going to think? How are they going to feel? And
Correct.
then after the fact, thinking about, is that really the right thing for me? How do I feel about it? But now I'm feeling, am I being selfish? Because my initial reaction was not selfish. So,
Yeah. I'll say also that our level of self-awareness is very important. So if I have a thought and I can know that thought of doing it or not doing it is because of everyone else, that's a tremendous level of self-awareness. So then we can have a lot of clarity on our own. You know, different people have different levels, and depending on our level will determine, how much we can self-assess. Yeah. And again, I'll say also, I would say that 9 out of 10 of our friends, I'm just saying that number, I don't know what it is, but 9 out of 10 of our friends are probably themselves entrenched in what everyone else is going to think. So they're clearly not a person I can go to for advice, right? So we have to find those right friends who are really the right people who can give us objective perspective. Okay, so the Rebbe continues that the evil inclination sees a young man, and so it will immediately come up with tactics to interfere with the good that he wants to do. And although the evil inclination is called an old and foolish king, that's the way it's a Hebrew phrase that we refer to the evil inclination with. Melech Zaken Uchsil is what it's the way we say it. It is so named because it persuades one to do things that are contrary to true wisdom. Why is it called old and foolish? Because what does it persuade us to do? It persuades us to do things which are not good for us. Or for those of you who are in Shul this Shabbos, I spoke about this, right? It will make a short-term, short-benefit decision for us, although long-term it's not going to be good for us. However, in its methods of deception and seduction, it is extremely crafty. But even though it's old and foolish on one hand, it's very, very crafty, very very creative in how to get us to do things. And so we have to be very, very careful. Like it'll convince us, no, you shouldn't do that, and give us a self-righteous justification for not doing what we should be doing. That's the real talent of the evil inclination. As our sages taught, the serpent, the snake, right, was cunning. And therefore, it is called a skilled craftsman. The snake, by the way, was the physical representation of the evil inclination. As the Torah testifies, it is indeed a true master of its work. Obviously, if a young man who's striving to go on this path is told, know that if you follow this path, there is a near certainty that you will become more God-fearing and more successful in your Torah study. He will not only be deterred from this path, he will not only not be deterred from this path, but will on the contrary increase his efforts. So the Rebbe is saying, if the young man who's striving to go on this path, which is the person he's writing to, right, is told, know that you will with near certainty become more God-fearing, then what's the young man going to do? He's going to fight through the evil inclination. Therefore, the only recourse for the evil inclination is to disguise itself. I'm sorry. What the Rebbe is saying is like this. If the evil inclination is going to come to the young man, and say to the young man, if the evil inclination is going to come to the young man and say to him, hey, listen, stop doing this, because if you do this, you're going to become more God-fearing. What's the young man going to do? He wants to become more God-fearing. So he's going to become more, he's going to stay on his path. So the evil inclination never comes to a man and says, stop doing this, is too good. He comes and says, no, it would be better if you stop doing this. And that's what the evil inclination does. Therefore, the only recourse for the evil inclination is to disguise itself as a righteous person and as a Torah scholar. So the evil inclination dresses up as a very religious person, coming to him with claims from the opposite angle, suggesting that if he continues on this new path, he will not achieve his goal of becoming the God-fearing individual he aspires to be. So what is the evil inclination that says, look, you switched yeshivas. This yeshiva is not working for you. The style doesn't work. They have different ways of doing things. You should go back to your other yeshiva. You're going to ruin your entire spiritual growth. So he's using a spiritual argument in order to stop him. That's exactly what the evil inclination does, right? The same way the evil inclination, as he's going to say now, comes to Reb Nachum of Chernobyl and says, don't give all the money to one person. You can give it to 6 people. You help out 6 people instead of helping out one person. And just by the fact that the evil inclination only said that after the good inclination said, give it all to one person, was Reb Nachum of Chernobyl able to be clear that it was the evil inclination's voice. So since there's no perfection in the world or in creation, with the exception of Hashem himself, who is the only perfect being, there will always be some place where the feeling of imperfection can be found no matter what. There's always imperfection. So a person can always say, oh, it's imperfect, you should stop doing it. The way to examine the above and determine which side these arguments and questions are coming from is illustrated in the story regarding the revered rabbi and scholar Reb Nachum from Chernobyl, as told over by my father-in-law, the Rebbe, printed in the talk of the Pesach 1943. The main point of the story is that if the demand is to prioritize understanding over doing, the Rebbe explains it a little bit differently actually, this is contrary to the proper way the Torah is received. I'll explain this in 1 second. Furthermore, if these claims interfere with a person's involvement in Torah, mitzvah, or prayer, it is certainly coming from the opposite side. So the Rebbe says 2 things. Number 1 is, we learn from Reb Nachum of Chernobyl's story that if a person is ready to do an act, and now someone is coming with calculations about that act, the calculations are off. Why? Because when we receive the Torah, what do we tell Hashem? Nasa, we will do. V'nishman, then we will understand. Understanding all can never precede doing in the sense of undoing what someone wants to do. If the understanding is blocking in action, it's a problem. So if I was ready to do something good, and then someone comes and argues with me why I shouldn't do it, evil inclination. And point number 2 is, if these claims interfere with a person's involvement in Torah, anything that's going to minimize your study of Torah or observance of mitzvahs is already, is from the evil inclination as well. So the Rebbe says, when reflecting even briefly that each river has its course, that each yeshiva has its unique path, then surely a person who has grown accustomed to his previous environment will recognize from the outset that in a new yeshiva, such as Temchei Temimim, there will be things that are different from what he is used to. And that at first, this change will often be a challenge to his second nature. It's obvious you come to a new place, a new environment, a new system, things are going to be different, and it's going to make you uncomfortable. It's all normal. It's not a reason to stop. If he approaches these changes skeptically with questions and complaints, it is surely coming from the opposite side, the evil inclination. But in truth, it is only in order that the opposite should occur. That he overcome the evil inclination and do the opposite of what it desires, and he will be motivated to persevere in the Torah study and in the performance of mitzvahs with great vigor. There is nothing that stands in the way of a person's will, and Hashem will grant him success. With blessing to be inscribed and sealed for a good year. This is right before Rosh Hashanah. We're good, everyone? Okay, let's go to our next letter. This letter is letter 40, to an appeal to build a Holocaust memorial in Paris. Okay, you're going to get the Rebbe's insight on what we as people should be focused on in moving the Jewish people forward, where we should be investing our time and our money. Okay? What makes a project worthwhile? To my dear and esteemed relative, Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi, greetings and blessings. I have received your letter dated for the 23rd of May, albeit somewhat belated, along with the attachments. This is 1952. I recall what my revered father-in-law, the Rebbe, told me regarding the center you established and the anticipated benefit that could come from it. He also participated in this endeavor with his personal donation to support this objective. Therefore, there is no need for my approval. If my father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, not only sent you words of encouragement regarding your project, but sent you money as well, there's no greater support to that and approval. Nevertheless, I too, following the king, it means following my father-in-law, express my admiration for what was done in this regard. Through our office, my participation in the center's activities will be sent in the amount of 15,000 francs. Okay, so we know he's in France, right? Or is that Germany? I don't even know. Anyone? No one knows? Frank? Oh, it's Marx. Okay, Frank says France. Okay. Regarding your letter about erecting a memorial monument, tomb of the unknown Jewish martyrs in Paris. Right? Very nice. Put up a tomb of the unknown Jewish martyrs in Paris. So what is the Rebbe's opinion on this? I request your forgiveness for not sharing your opinion. The Rebbe says, I disagree with you about putting up such a monument. I cannot help but imagine how those holy martyrs who were killed sanctifying God's name would react to the proposal of establishing a monument in their memory in central Paris, led by an association of righteous individuals, Hasidim indeed, but still righteous among the nations, Chasidi Umas Ha'olam. So basically, who wants to put up this? Who are the people that want to put up this tomb? This tomb of the unknown Jewish martyrs? They were the Chasidi Umas Ha'olam, the righteous Gentiles of the world. So imagine a bunch of Gentiles come, and they say, "We would love to put up a tomb of the unknown Jewish martyrs in Paris." Isn't that a beautiful thing? And it's not Jews putting it up even, it's Gentiles putting it up. So what's the Rebbe's opinion? What would the martyrs say, is the Rebbe's question. How would they respond to such a proposal? Especially now, when there are literally hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of living martyrs, both known and unknown, who are in desperate need of physical sustenance, and even more who hunger spiritually. The Rebbe is basically saying, we have physical living martyrs who need basic needs for their life, and surely they are hungry for spiritual needs. Should we be spending money on a monument? The primary obstacle to meeting their needs is a lack of resources. Therefore, if any sum of money is raised, the question immediately arises, should it be used to erect a monument in a prominent public square in Paris, so that the passerby will remember that millions of Jews were killed for sanctifying God's name? Or should it be used to sustain the lives of those who are starving and thirsty in both physical and spiritual senses? And by the way, just notice how the Rebbe is saying people who are starving physically and spiritually. In other words, both of them are vitally, vitally important. And as we've discussed other times, arguably spiritual hunger is in certain ways even more critical than physical hunger. In my opinion, the answer is unequivocal. Although the idea of building a monument can be partially justified, given that helping the hungry has become routine and not everyone will be inclined to donate for that purpose, whereas a large monument in a major city that will be known by many prominent Jews and non-Jews may attract more willing participants, it is still difficult to justify spending thousands of dollars on some stone and earth in a corner of Paris when thousands upon thousands of Jews, both in the Holy Land and abroad, are crying out for urgent help. I repeat my request for forgiveness for not agreeing with your opinion, and I hope you won't take offense. With blessings and respect to you, your wife, and the entire household, my dear relatives, may you live and be well. So it's really fascinating to me. By the way, this is very insightful. And I've learned this from the Rebbe, that when we decide where we're going to invest our energy and our resources, we have to ask ourselves, is this creating a beautiful impression? Or is this producing on-the-ground results? The Rebbe was very, very into this, and therefore the Rebbe was not into a lot of things that the Jewish community at large gets excited about. Because the Rebbe was at the end of the day a bottom line person. He would always repeat a Mishnah, a teaching from Ethics of Our Fathers, Hamaisa Hua Iker, Action is the main thing. Deed is the main thing. At the end of the day, is this going to actually serve the Jewish people in a very powerful way or not? If not, it's a beautiful thing, but it's not what what's actually going to be helpful and productive. Ready for the next letter, everyone? Okay, letter 41, mitzvah makes a difference. Holland, 1967. Greeting and blessing. I'm in receipt of your letter as requested. I will remember you in prayer for fulfillment of your heart's desires for good in the matters in which you write. Inasmuch as everything connected with Torah and mitzvahs are at the level of daily conduct, has to be on the increase. So the Rebbe first establishes something very simple. Goodness always needs to be increased. Very simple. This is a truth the Rebbe always has. You know something is alive if it's growing. If it's good, it always needs to increase. So Rebbe was always about us increasing. So he says that our connection with Torah and mitzvahs on a daily level must increase. I trust that this is the case with you as well, for it is largely a matter of will and determination. It's primarily just a matter of will and being determined. As our sages say, try hard and you will succeed. Yagaita umatzasa tamin. He's quoting a quote from the Talmud, which is one of, by the way, the 12 passages of the Torah that the Rebbe wanted children to be taught. And that is that if someone says, I put in effort, I tried hard, and I did not succeed, do not believe him. It's not possible that someone tried and did not succeed. So if they say, I tried and I didn't succeed, don't believe him. If someone says, I didn't try, I didn't put any effort, and I succeeded, don't believe him. It's not possible to succeed if you don't try. And if someone says, yeah, I tried and I succeeded, believe him. Because that's the true equation. So he's saying that if a person has will and determination, and they try, they will succeed. Regardless of the various questions that you have on the topic of emunah, of faith, I would suggest you read the Kuzari. Anyone here ever studied the Kuzari? The Kuzari was written, I think, about 1,000 years ago. It's a fascinating book that has a lot of Jewish philosophy in it, that addresses a lot of, he really in a very grounded way explains a lot of matters of faith. So the Rebbe tells him that would be a good thing for him to read, which can be obtained in Hebrew and in English translation. It will give you new insights and clear up many of your questions. Obviously, it is difficult to discuss and explicate adequately such questions in a letter. The Rebbe writes this often, that big questions, very hard to articulate simply in a letter, but it is not really necessary to rely on correspondence, since you are able to discuss these matters with your Rosh Yeshiva or Mashpia. He says you're in yeshiva. It sounds like he's a yeshiva boy. And therefore you can speak about it with the head of your yeshiva or your mashpir, your spiritual advisor. However, I will refer to one point here, although it has to be brief. So Rebbe says, I will make one point. The question is this. What difference can it make to God whether a person does or does not fulfill his commandments? What? The Rebbe says, this is a big question. What difference does it make to God whether I do or don't light Shabbos candles? Is it really critical? Now, we can very easily dismiss it, right? And conveniently. Like, I missed a week, okay. I'll get it next week. Purim, next holiday is Purim. I didn't hear the Megillah. I only heard the Megillah once. I didn't hear it that night and that day. I just only at night or only at day. Okay, that's pretty good, right? Is it really important? Is every single mitzvah so important? So the Rebbe says there are various analogies to assist in explaining this question. Take, for example, such an ordinary thing as money. As when one makes a donation for tzedakah, it may well make a difference to the average person whether he gives 1 gulden or 100 gulden. But to a multimillionaire, neither amount is of any consequence. So in other words, to one person, if they make a donation of $1 versus $100, it's a difference. $100 is more significant. But if you're talking about a multimillionaire, $100 and $1, it really is quite insignificant to what they have. However, if this multimillionaire happens to be a man of profound knowledge and feeling, he will consider the amounts of 1 gulden and 100 gulden, not in terms of his scale of values and their importance to him, the giver, but rather in terms of what they represent to the needy person receiving them. Only a self-oriented person will look at the value of what they're giving based on what it means to them. The whole idea of giving is you're giving it to someone else. So the question is, what value does it have to the other person? You're giving it to a poor person. There's a huge difference between giving him $1 and $100. And the multimillionaire that that is, well, say, I'll say self-aware, will be aware of this. For this reason, our sages of blessed memory explained that sometimes a single pruta, that's like a penny, a nickel, for tzedakah in one particular case may be more significant than a huge sum in another. That sometimes a tiny amount will be more than a large amount. Why? Because the tiny amount going to a person who's poverty stricken, versus a large amount going to some big organization with an endowment fund. The smaller amount may have much bigger impact. In a somewhat similar manner, the creator of man, God, who knows and understands the difficulties that beset every individual, evaluates an action not in terms of its significance to him, but in terms of its significance to the person performing it. The Rebbe makes this point numerous times. It's a well-known story where a guy, actually, I know this guy's son. A man came to the Rebbe with his wife and his father-in-law. And he came as sort of a guy who, I'm not religious, I'm not interested in religion, I have no interest in it. But his wife was more interested in Judaism, as was the father-in-law, who was a little bit more traditional of a Jew. And so they came to the Rebbe. So when he was going to go into the Rebbe's room, the Rebbe's secretary told him, if you want to go into the Rebbe's room, you have to give a note with your name and your mother's name. He said, I'm just the chauffeur, I'm just the driver, I'm just here to bring them, I'm not here to engage. The Rebbe's secretary said, I don't care, if you're going into the Rebbe's room, you must give a letter with your name and your mother's name. So he gave it, whatever. They're sitting in the Rebbe's room, and the Rebbe goes through the notes of all three people. And when he comes to this guy's note, he says, are you sure you're not missing a name? And basically, he had forgotten, I think it was the second name of his mother or something. And when the Rebbe asked him that, he suddenly remembered that his mother had a second Jewish name. So now already the Rebbe got his attention, right? He sees he's not sitting in front of an ordinary person. The Rebbe, right? They never met before. The Rebbe has no idea who his mother is, right? But the Rebbe knew that the name was not right. I'll say it this way: if your mind needs help in understanding it, I'll just say it this way: when a soul came before the Rebbe, and the Rebbe saw a discrepancy, the Rebbe felt the soul and just understood that this name is just not a reflection of this soul. I don't know how the Rebbe knows such things is way beyond me, but somehow the Rebbe knew that, right? So then when he finished talking to the wife and the father-in-law, then the Rebbe turned to him and said, do you have any questions for me? And he didn't really have. So he's trying to brainstorm a question. And really, I mean, he was a guy who was not interested in Judaism. He had his issues with Judaism. So it came to him. So he said, does God really care whether I do or do not, I forgot exactly what he said, whether I eat kosher or not, or do a certain mitzvah? Does God really care? Like, why does God need me to do all of these things for him? So the Rebbe told him very simply, you think God asks you to do the mitzvahs for him? God gave you the mitzvahs for you. What they will do for you. And this changed this guy's entire experience of understanding of Judaism. It woke him up. It woke him up. And the Rebbe's writing the exact same thing in the letter right here. So the Rebbe's saying, if an individual, where are we? So the Creator who knows and understands, the difficulties that beset every individual. God knows, because he designed us, all of the challenges that we have. And so he evaluates an action not in terms of its significance to him, but in terms of its significance to the person performing it. Inasmuch as God, in his infinite kindness, desires that his creations should have some connection with him. He has given us a set of mitzvahs to help accomplish this. God understands that the very best thing for a human being to thrive in this world is to have a relationship with the source of all, the infinite being. Yet, as I'm going to mention in tonight's class, our new course, that really the gap between infinite and finite is infinite. There is no way for a human being to come up with a method to relate to something infinite, because we don't have the capacity. We're not infinite beings, we're only finite beings. So God, in his infinite kindness, gave us tools, connectors. And he said, when you do this, you are connecting with me. We call those in English mitzvos, which is the reason why you may have heard in other classes that the word mitzvah actually means to connect. And that is the greatest gift for a human being, that now we can be connected with the infinite. And in light of the above mentioned analogy, the significance of the fulfillment of each mitzvah is judged by him in human terms, according to the effort and dedication that each individual puts into it. And then God judges it based on our reality, not based on God's reality. When he sees that we as human beings make an effort based on our reality and our limits, then God judges it based on our efforts. To make use of another analogy, if an individual accomplished something which brought about a change or revolution in the world, you would take it for granted that this would be something that God would take notice of. The guy made a revolution in the world. Whereas you only seem to have difficulty with the idea that the act of putting on tefillin can matter to God. But when you put on tefillin, you as an individual, you do a little mitzvah, which is not creating a revolution in the world. You wonder, does this have any significance? Yet the mitzvahs of tefillin, which are put on the left hand, facing the heart, and on the head, the seat of the intellect, has the significance of uniting and harmonizing the heart and the mind of the person putting them on. And in terms of the individual, this may be taking place on a scale as critical and as significant to him as some earth-shattering event in relation to God. In other words, what the Rebbe is saying is that the same way someone who makes a worldwide revolution, which of course is very far and rare for someone to do. I mean, how many people do we know that ever made such a revolution? It's very extremely unusual. But we would say that's very significant to God. The guy made an impact, a worldwide impact. Rabbi says when a man puts on tefillin, he's using this example. Of course, there are any examples. But a man puts on tefillin and unites his mind and heart in alignment with God. That is a revolution in this person's life, especially when the person wasn't raised putting on tefillin. And he now makes the choice to put on tefillin, right? And then he says, I'm going to do it every day. That's unbelievable, right? That is a revolution. So God sees it as a revolution, right? What happens if a woman is invited to light Shabbos candles and she closes her eyes and she has a moment of prayer that she never had in her life because no one ever even gave her this opportunity, right? That single moment is a revolutionary moment. And to God, that's a revolution. That's the point the Rebbe is making. So another of your questions refers to the fact that at a time when religious disputations with non-Jews were forced upon us, the Jews sometimes informed their non-Jewish adversaries that they were not obligated to explain all the sayings of our sages, and you wonder why this might have what this might have meant. So he's asking that there were times 500, 670 years ago where the Christians insisted that the Jews debate them they wanted to prove that Judaism is wrong. The problem with that was it put the Jews in a very dangerous position, because the fact is that Judaism is right. And the fact is that Jewish scholars are far more profound scholars than Christian scholars, who are relatively shallow compared to the depth of Jewish scholars. Their understanding of the Torah is an iota, literally, of what we understand of the Torah, even though of a classic yeshiva student. And so what happens then is you're in a position that you have to get up in front of everyone, in front of Christians, in front of a king very often, and disprove Christianity. Now imagine if you win that dispute. Is that good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? So as we say, it's a lose-lose situation. You lose, you lose, you win, you lose. So the Jews tried to avoid this by all means, and they tried not to answer certain things. But this yeshiva student is asking the Rebbe, why didn't they answer Why did they say we're not obligated to explain this? Sounds like they didn't have an explanation. The answer is, you surely know that there is an issur, prohibition against teaching of certain aspects of Torah to non-Jews. Part of the reason is that there are certain things we're not allowed to teach non-Jews from the Torah. There were times when it was simply too dangerous to declare this openly, and it was felt necessary to find some other way to evade any question, the response to which would entail a transgression of the said issur. So one of the Rebbe is saying something different than I just said, that sometimes it's simply prohibited to teach certain things to non-Jews, because by the way, a non-Jew is really not supposed to study Torah. So therefore, the answer preferred was the assertion that there was an obligation on the Jewish representative to the disputation to explain all the sayings of our sages. This the prohibition, was particularly strict in connection with certain inner aspects of the Torah, so-called secrets of the Torah, the esoteric parts of the Torah, many of which are hidden in various sayings of our sages. Consequently, the rabbis who were forced to participate in the disputations were particularly careful not to reveal these secrets to their non-Jewish adversaries. You do not indicate in your letter what particular saying of our sages you had in mind when you asked the above question. Therefore, it's difficult to go into specifics, but no doubt you will understand how the explanation applies to the particular saying that necessitated the evasive answer. I would suggest that you have your tefillin checked. This is very interesting. When the Rebbe told someone to check their tefillin, generally speaking, there was a problem with their tefillin. If they have not been checked within the past 12 months. But another thing also is that the Rebbe was a very big advocate that we check our tefillin once a year. Although, according to halacha, Jewish law, one does not need to. Once a pair of tefillin has an established position, I guess, of being kosher, because we had them checked once, then we assume that they're kosher, and one doesn't have to assume otherwise. However, regardless, because tefillin have a very strong impact on a person's life, and many blessings flow through the mitzvah of tefillin, so therefore we try and have our tefillin checked by a scribe at least once a year. All right, everyone. With this, we conclude. Have a fantastic day.